Hey, what's up? My name's Steven. Just want to make a quick video kind of showing how I was able to fit a set of coilovers on my car. So depending on what kit you go with, you're going to end up with a coilover that looks similar to this. Like I said, this is from a 2006 to 2011 Civic. Real simple. Basically what we'll be doing is you'll be taking out your stock suspension, the whole strut tower, or not the strut tower, but the strut housing, everything, removing it from the car, cutting your stock strut housing down, and you'll be welding this part onto your factory strut housing. You'll be using your stock top hat from your car. Kind of a bummer. I was hoping I'd be able to make this work since it's got an adjustable plate, but you know, unfortunately this is just quite a bit narrower than what's on the Corolla. As far as the rear goes, we'll walk back here and I'll show you. So the kit, my kit came with these adjustable shocks, which you can make those fit pretty easily. They slide right in the top mounts. The bottom mounts, you'll have to use a different bushing. In my case, I just took and pressed out the bushings that were in those shocks and then installed the bushing that was in the old shocks. All right, so step one is you're gonna be removing your factory, the whole strut assembly. So there's 3 nuts up top in the strut tower. You'll undo those. You've got 2, I think 15 millimeters on the bottom that holds everything together, and then you'll have to remove your brake caliper as well, and then the whole assembly will slide out. Next step, once you have this out of the car, next step is gonna be removing the coil spring and the strut insert. Super easy. You'll just remove your top hat. There's one, I think 17 millimeter, maybe it's a 19, can't remember, bolt or nut up here. Remove that, top cap comes off, spring will slide off, and then the strut insert is threaded in the strut tube here. You'll just take a flat head and a hammer and there's some notches where you can fit your flat head in and hit it with a hammer, and it'll eventually loosen up, and then that whole strut will slide out of that tube. All right, so once you get your strut insert loose, it should pull right out. Mine's not, because at some point in its life, my strut housing's taken some trauma, so it's bent just enough to where it won't come out. But it's definitely up far enough for me to go ahead and make my cut. Again, the cut doesn't have to be super precise down here. I'm gonna probably leave 1/2 inch or so of the stock tubing on my cut. It doesn't have to be perfectly square or anything like that. It's just gonna be a little nub there to give me some bracing when I'm fitting everything together. All right, so once you've cut your housing, just to give you kind of a quick idea of what would happen next, you'll go and clean everything up around here where you're gonna weld. But here's the new coilover, and it's just gonna set on top of that. So that gives you kind of a quick and dirty idea of how this whole thing works. Again, we'll clean all this up, put a nice weld along this base. And then you'll be putting your factory top hat back on, and then it'll be ready to go back on. So super simple. All right, so once your once your metal's all cleaned up and ready to go, you can go ahead and remove the bottom portion of the coilover. Just unscrew it, tack weld everything, and then reinstall everything on the car. I know it seems like a lot of work, but just reinstall it and make sure that everything's lined up well. You know, make sure you don't have some crazy issue going on. You know, because there is a fair amount, probably a 1/4 inch of movement, you know, that you could end up placing this somewhere that's going to get you way off. For the most part, you'll be able to get everything aligned back as far as the toe, but this right here from side to side is going to affect kind of where your camber's at. So if you're not running camber plates, you know, wherever you end up welding this is where you're going to be stuck. In my case, it's not a huge deal. I may end up running T3 camber plates with these coilovers at some point, but for now, I'm going to just tack weld everything, reinstall it on the car, make sure everything's lined up the way I want it, nothing looks crazy, and then I'll take everything back off, get it back to this point, do my final weld. All right, so once everything's welded up and you've test fitted it, you can go ahead and finish up your welds, which I've already done. And this is what you're left with. So the last thing that we'll be doing is putting the stock top hat on, which is super simple. Shoot, wrong socket. To be completely honest with you, this right here was gonna be the hardest part. I thought was just how to make everything work. I was planning on using these top hats, and then once I realized it was just going to take a ton of fab work to make these fit, I got super lucky. So if you take this off, this factory top hat, it'll fit, and everything, I already checked everything, it's all made kind of the same. It'll slide right on there and sit. It's got a bearing inside there. Everything works pretty well. And then you even can use the factory nut. It's the same threads. And everything just goes together really nice. Torque everything down and you're good to go. This part I just got super lucky with. Pretty happy with how it all went together. So that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna throw this back on the car, see where we're at, make sure everything's lined up, get both sides same height, and be ready to roll. All right, so once you get everything welded up, cleaned up, put it back together, obviously reverse order of the way you took it apart, and you should end up with something pretty close to this. One thing to mention is you definitely, depending on what wheel spec you have, you know, I'm obviously running a flare, so I think I'm a 15x9. I know it's at least a 0 offset. It may be a -10 or 15. I'll double check, but just be, you know, take note. If you're gonna go super low and you're not running a pretty decent offset wheel, you could run into problems with the clearance of this. This is pretty close to the factory size strut, or the strut housing, but it's a little bit thicker, so it is taking away, you know, the what size wheel. I mean, if you're running something that's super offset, like a factory style wheel, probably gonna run into issues with this, could potentially, especially if you're wanting to get, you know, fairly low, you're definitely gonna end up with issues here. Just keep that in mind. As long as you're running a pretty close spec to the wheel I'm running. You really shouldn't have an issue. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it. That's the gist of everything I've done to make this work. Again, the coilovers cost me 260 bucks. I now have a functioning suspension, unlike before with blown struts and blown shocks. So pretty happy with how everything turned out and how easy it was to put it together. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Again, thanks for watching.